Hello, I'm Michael Martinez, and you're listening to another episode of the Middle Earth blog podcast. There will be no AI voices this week, as I promised, and I'm not sure how far I'm going to be able to take this format, but we'll see. Instead of talking about one of my blog posts, I thought I'd just bring up a whole new topic, and something that's always fascinated me is the idea of what Elvish voices actually sounded like in J.R.R. Tolkien's mind. Um, the voices that the actors used in the Peter Jackson movies were nothing like Tolkien elf voices. I can tell you that. They all spoke with a low, raspy voice kind of thing. It was supposed to sound sophisticated or something, I'm not sure, but it sounded about as unelvish to me as you could possibly get. And I never understood why they went that way, because there are just hundreds of mentions of voices in The Lord of the Rings in the narrative, and Tolkien described elvish voices in many passages. I thought I'd read a few of them to you, just to see how that comes across. So here's the first passage that describes an elvish voice. "Listen, they're coming this way," said Frodo. "We have only to wait." The singing drew nearer. One clear voice rose now above the others. It was singing in the fair elven tongue, of which Frodo knew only a little, and the others knew nothing. Yet the sound, blending with the melody, seemed to shape itself in their thought into words which they only partly understood. So, right off the bat, we're told that the elves speak with clear voices. I'm not really sure what a clear voice sounds like, but I'm pretty sure that it doesn't have a low, whispery quality to it. Uh, just I love Liv Tyler, but as an actress, but her constant hoarse voice just grated on me terribly. Elrond, Hugo Weaving, he kind of did better, but I'm not really sure that his voice was what Tolkien would have imagined either. And as my friend Hawk Robinson and I used to joke about on his old Middle Earth podcast, he sounded so much like Agent Smith in The Matrix that we just kept imagining him saying, "Mr. Aragorn." So here's another passage. Then another clear voice, as young and as ancient as spring, like the song of a glad flower flowing down into the night from a bright morning in the hills, came falling like silver to meet them. "Now let the song begin. Let us sing together of sun, stars, moon, and mist, rain and cloudy weather. Light on the building leaf, dew on the feather, wind on the open hill, bells on the heather, reeds by the shady pool, lilies on the water, old Tom Bombadil and the river daughter." So that was not an elf voice, so far as we know. That was Goldberry's voice, but I I just think that it's interesting that Tolkien described her voice as clear and musical, which is a quality that he associated with the elves. Through the years, there have been many discussions that I've been a part of, and or that I've read and followed between Tolkien fans about what exactly Goldberry was. Was she like Tom Bombadil? Was she an elf? Was she a Maya? Nobody really knows. I just sort of arbitrarily class her in with Bombadil as an aborigine. That's the way Tolkien described Bombadil, but he never really explained what an aborigine of Middle Earth is supposed to be. The word just means that they've been there from the beginning. Um, Here's another passage. As Strider was speaking, they watched his strange, eager face, dimly lit in the red glow of the wood fire. His eyes shone, and his voice was rich and deep. I can't really go rich and deep, but I think it's interesting. Of all the characters in The Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien describes many different aspects of Aragorn's voice, far more than any other character. And he speaks in low whispers. He speaks like someone from Bree. He speaks more like someone from the Rohirrim. He speaks like someone from Gondor. He is a very fluent, multilingual, multi-dialectal speaker. And I'm not really sure what his natural voice is, but I don't think it's an elven voice. I rather suspect this rich and deep voice was his natural voice. And that passage comes at the tail end of him describing for the hobbits some of the history of his family of Beren and Luthien. Here's another passage. Strider sprang from hiding and dashed down towards the road, leaping with a cry through the heather. But even before he had moved or called, the rider had reined in his horse and halted, looking up towards the thicket where they stood. When he saw Strider, he dismounted and ran to meet him, calling out, "I Navidwain Dunadan, me Gavanin." His speech and clear, ringing voice left no doubt in their hearts. The rider was of the elven folk. So again, he's got a clear voice. Now, Tolkien doesn't really describe what a clear voice sounds like, but I'm again going to say that I don't think there was any raspy, whispery texture to it. Now, that's not to say that the elves couldn't whisper. They do. When Frodo met the elves in the Shire, they did speak in low voices among themselves, and there are a couple of other passages that I'm not going to quote where elves do kind of speak in low voices. So they're very capable of whispering, but it when they're speaking in a full voice. They don't really seem to have a human quality to them. Um, Here's another passage. Glorfindel was tall and straight. His hair was of shining gold, his face fair and young and fearless and full of joy. His eyes were bright and keen, and his voice was like music. On his brow sat wisdom, and his hand was strength. That's when Frodo sees Frodo at Elrond's feast. Let's see. They got up and withdrew quietly into the shadows and made for the doors. Sam they left behind, fast asleep, still with a smile on his face. In spite of his delight in Bilbo's company, Frodo felt a tug of regret as they passed out of the Hall of Fire. Even as they stepped over to the threshold, a single, clear voice rose in song. Elbereth Gilthoniel, Sylvan Penna Miriel. Well, y'all know the chant. So I'm not sure whose voice that is. Tolkien doesn't really attribute it to anybody. I've always assumed it was Arwen's, but that is the scene where Frodo turns around and he looks and he sees Arwen with Aragorn and Elrond. But the narrative doesn't tell us who that is. Here's another passage from Many Meanings. Then all listened while well, actually, this is from the Council of Elrond. Then all listened while Elrond, in his clear voice, spoke of Sauron and the rings of power and their forging in the second age of the world long ago. So again, he's even though Elrond is only half elven, he has a clear voice. Another passage. There was a sound of soft laughter over their heads, and then another clear voice spoken in elven tongue. Frodo could understand little of what was said, for the speech that the sylvan folk of east of the mountains used among themselves was unlike that of the west. Legolas looked up and answered in the same language. So that's where they meet Haldir and his brothers, the March Wardens of Lorien. And here's one more passage. Nay, there was no change of counsel, said the Lady Galadriel, speaking for the first time. Her voice was clear and musical, but deeper than woman's wont. So that's interesting. Um, I, for a long time, I had imagined that the elves all spoke with high, clear voices. I don't know if that phrase actually occurs anywhere in one of Tolkien's writings, but that's what I always imagined for a long time. But this passage from describing Galadriel's voice gives us a rich, deep voice, and it's a little bit deeper than a woman's. So how do you portray that with a human actor? I'm not sure you can. Maybe someone will do some AI voice experiments and come up with some interesting things. But you have to have a real definitive way of explaining or describing what a clear voice truly sounds like. I've been thinking about that the last few days as I was imagining what I might want to do with this podcast episode. And there are a couple of popular songs or singers whose voices that I think kind of come close to fitting the description. I debated whether I should try and sample some of their songs for this podcast, but I don't think I will. I don't want to. I don't want to mess with the risk crossing somebody's copyrights issues. Um, The first voice that came to mind was Tom Chaplin from the British adult alternative group or alternative adult group Keen. Their most famous song was "Somewhere Only We Know." Somewhere only we know. So there are a couple of passages in that song where his voice rises high, and it's very clear. It's very melodic. He's got a great voice, or at least he had a really great voice when he was about 30 years old, which is how old he was, I guess, when they recorded that song. The guy can still sing 20 years later. I'm not gonna I'm not dissing him, but I'll touch on that in a moment. The other singer that came to mind was Freddie Mercury, the lead singer for Queen. He had just an amazing voice, and of course the whole group, like uh, I guess their first single. Well, no, I mean several of their songs, the whole group would just kick in and then have this high, clear melodic choir singing in falsettos or close to falsettos, but you don't really want a falsetto. A falsetto voice is kind of like the guy from Pirates of the Caribbean, and so we shall go to war, or something like that. So that's not my idea of what a Tolkien elf would sound like. At least not a male elf. Maybe one who was being squeezed a little bit too hard by a dragon or a Balrog. Um, but there are some things about human voices that probably would make it difficult for us to really replicate or fulfill Tolkien's vision of an elvish voice. For one thing, your voice changes over time. Now we all know that as children our voices are much higher pitched and they drop when we enter puberty and we grow up. But your voice, at least some people's voice ranges drop even lower over time, especially among women, at least that I've noticed. A lot of women that I knew when they were young had, in my impression, higher, somewhat, I don't know, more melodic voices than they had when they matured into their 40s and 50s and things. And I'm not saying that their voices were bad or anything like that. They just dropped. When I was in college, I took voice lessons one quarter, and my instructor, Dr. Forster, tested my range, my vocal range. He determined I could, with some effort and practice, I could cover about 2.5 octaves, which was pretty good. I can't do that now, and but I've noticed in the last few years when I sing along with my favorite songs that although I can't hit the high notes that I used to hit, I can sing in a much lower key than I used to be able to with much greater ease. Now, uh, I'll try and give you an example. One of the songs that he taught me to sing in that summer was a German song. I think the name was Du bist die Ruhe. I know that was the first line of the song. I don't remember the whole song, but when he played an example for me, it was a studio recording, and the artist who had recorded it was a man who sang bass. And so his voice was extremely deep. I couldn't match it. I mean, it was like "Du bist die Ruhe, du Friede mir," and I just butchered it terribly there. So that's not a good singing voice. I could get down into like the upper baritone levels, and so Dr. Forster, when he uh, played the song for me on his piano, he raised the key for me, and so I was able to sing more along the lines of "Du bist die Ruhe, du Friede mir." Um, I had a friend who was also taking voice lessons, and she learned the same song. She sang much higher than I did, and so that's an example of how music can be sung at many different ranges, many different keys. I don't know if Tolkien imagined his elvish voices dropping or changing keys that much or at all, because unlike human beings who age over 70, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years, and our voices change radically, the elves live, thousands of years. So Galadriel, even though she was wearing a ring of power, which slowed down her aging by a factor of 10, she was still very ancient. She had been born in Valinor before the rebellion of the Noldor, so she was many thousands of years old. And it could be that Tolkien thought it all through and decided, well, maybe her voice had dropped, but we don't really know. We do know that she should have looked very young, compared to many of the other women that are mentioned or described in passing in the Lord of the Rings. I'm thinking of like the nurses in Gondor. Um, so there's just a sort of open-ended aspect to what Tolkien elves should sound like. I'm pretty sure that their voices would have been consistent for a long, long period in their lives. They would not have had that. They wouldn't have sound raspy, unless they were ill or injured. They wouldn't have had the buzz that some people have. Think of Sugar Ray, the group, the lead singer. I forget his name, but someday, you know, uh, he had a. It's a good voice. It's a good voice, but that's. I don't think that's an Elvish voice. It's not clear. Uh, to me, clear means that your voice is going to be melodic, and as I quoted for you there, I think I quoted it. There is at least one passage where Tolkien described a melodic voice. So uh, that's something to think about. A lot of these passages have elves singing, but their singing was not really like our pop singing. It was the way he described Elvish songs was that they were performed like Gregorian chants. Or cants. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce that, but my father can beat your father at dominoes, kind of thing. And um, I have a hard time imagining those songs in the Lord of the Rings being enunciated that way, but he clearly calls them chants in the text. If you read The Road Goes Ever On, where Tolkien discusses some of the songs, including Galadriel's farewell song, the Marye, he calls them chants. So they're not supposed to be singing these songs to a melody the way that a pop singer would sing. Like just one of your favorite songs. I don't want to really say it'd be more like rap or hip hop, but it'd be more like, uh, well, there was a German group called Gregorian, and they took pop songs and they gave them a Gregorian chant kind of feel. That might be closer to the way that the Elven songs would have been pronounced, but in their normal everyday speech, I would say that a Tolkien elf's voice would have sounded very different from a normal human's voice. From my voice, I'm kind of high pitched, but I'm also a little bit nasal. I don't sound anything like an elf, I don't think. So it would be if you really wanted to try and do elvish voices on a soundtrack. I think you'd probably have to use some kind of software to modify them and make them sound really good. The um, the movies had to distinguish or differentiate between different cultures, different races, and at the time the movies came out, a lot of people complained about certain aspects of how things were portrayed, and I I defended I to this day I will defend the movies for doing that. They had to give the audience clues because they knew that most people who watched those films would not be as familiar with the details of Tolkien's world as uh, the hardcore book fans were. So they did have to kind of stretch things a little bit to overemphasize the aspects that distinguished or differentiated each of the races from the other races. So humans got to talk normally, and elves talked in low, raspy, whispery kinds of voices, and Hugo Weaving probably had the most human-like elf voice that I can think of, because he spoke with great authority and he got more lines than pretty much anybody else in the well, except for Legolas. Um, the dwarves, for some bizarre reason, were given Scottish brogues, Scottish accents. There's nothing in the books that indicates that they sounded like they were ready to put on a kilt and come roaring down the hills towards the Roman soldiers, but that was the decision that was made. Uh, and the orcs. I don't know about the orc voices. They were Tolkien had trouble describing orcs in the books, and that is in part, or perhaps mostly, because there were so many different types of orcs. They had literally been bred by the evil powers to perform different tests, to have different attributes, physical qualities, and so there's no such thing as a single generic orc genotype. I don't think you're just going to have to imagine many different small orcs, fat orcs, orcs that climb on rocks and all that stuff. Um, I think that pretty much covers everything that I had in mind. I don't have anything else in my notes. So I hope you found this interesting and enlightening. I'm sorry I don't have any canned cheesy music to go along with it, or any decent sound bites, but I do recommend that you go listen to some good Queen songs, or Keen, and you'll get a pretty good idea of what I at least think elves, male elves maybe, probably sounded like, at least on some occasions. So thanks for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe and do all that stuff. And hopefully I'll see you next time.